Now, one of the most important parts of the economy is exchange, which is something that we all participate in. In the free market, we have voluntary exchange, where both parties benefit, or at least when they exchange, they believe they're going to benefit. Unfortunately, there's another kind of exchange where only one party benefits. You can think of this like taxes. Well, who benefits from the taxes that we give to the government? The government does, but we really don't, although they try to tell us that we do. So that doesn't happen, though, in the free market. Only with governments and only with government intervention does this kind of exchange take place. In the free market, both parties benefit, they exchange voluntarily, and they are peaceful. In economics, we talk about value scales. This is a fancy way of ranking the things that you want and the things that you value. We have an example here of a person who values, firstly, a loaf of bread, and then $3, and thirdly, a candy bar. Now let's say that this person walks into the store with this value scale, and they're going to buy a loaf of bread because they have $3, but they want a loaf of bread more. However, they walk by the candy aisle, and it looks kind of tempting, and their value scale changes, and they decide they want the candy bar more than the loaf of bread. This is what we all do all the time. Throughout our lives, every time you walk into a store, this is what you're engaging in. It's, like I said, a fancy way to talk about what we do all the time. The law of supply and demand. What is that, and how does it work? Well, the law of supply and demand means when there's more demand for a good than there is quantity of the good, the price goes up. Since the price goes up, it's more profitable to produce that good, so more of the good is produced and the supply and demand equal out. Now, you're probably thinking that's kind of complicated. And yeah, it is. So we're going to take a real-world example to simplify it. Let's say that at $3 a gallon, there are 500,000 gallons of milk being produced, and that's the demand. There's demand for 500,000 gallons. Now let's say that someone writes a book on the benefits of milk and how good milk is for you, and it gets on the New York Times bestseller list, and the demand doubles because now everyone wants to drink milk. Well, now the demand is twice as much as the supply. So what's going to happen? Well, the price is going to go up. The price goes up to $5 a gallon. And whenever the price goes up, the demand will shrink to some extent because more people value the $5 than they do the gallon of milk. So now at this new price, the demand for milk goes down to 800,000 gallons. Now at $5, the people selling the milk are getting an extra $2. That's a pretty good profit per gallon. So they're going to start producing more, and more people are going to enter that market and produce it. So eventually we're going to have 800,000 gallons of milk produced, which will meet the demand. Now there's two important points to make about this. Firstly, did you see the government in there at all? Was the government part of that? Well, no. This process worked peacefully and voluntarily, and they were able to meet this demand, and there was no government intervention. A little later on, we'll be looking at what happens when the government does intervene. Secondly, the law of supply and demand rests on the subjective theory of value. Okay, well, what in the world is the subjective theory of value? Well, we're going to take the example of a hamburger, which most people enjoy and value. What gives a hamburger value? Well, there's three explanations. Firstly, some people say that the hamburger has value because of the products that went into making it, such as the cattle and the wheat that went into making the bun, and so forth. Secondly, some say that the hamburger has value because of all the work that went into it. I mean, taking care of cattle is kind of a big project to take on. It's a lot of work. So that's why we value hamburgers. And thirdly, so the subjective theory is simply there's value in hamburgers because consumers like them. And this is really the most plausible theory. The second one is Marxist. This is the Marxist labor theory. But the problem with this is we don't really think about the labor that goes into something, and I'm sure that people could make lots of products that no one wants to buy, even though they put a lot of work in it. The classic example is if you went out and bought a piece of the Sahara Desert and you spent a week or more digging a hole. Well, that'd be hard work digging this hole in the Sahara Desert. But who's going to buy it? Well, consumers don't really value a hole in the Sahara Desert much. So obviously that's not going to have a very high price in the market, which is contradictory to the labor theory. In Austrian economics, we place a great emphasis on entrepreneurs as being central to the economy. And I think there's a lot of confusion about entrepreneurs. There are actually two types of entrepreneurs. There are political entrepreneurs and market entrepreneurs. Now, political entrepreneurs make money and succeed because they have connections in government. They can, through government, cripple their competitors and subsidize themselves. On the other hand, market entrepreneurs succeed only because they provide something that consumers want and value. That's how they make money. So let's take a moment and look at real entrepreneurs. We all know that there's no certainty about the future. We all know that we don't know anything about what's going to happen. But yet entrepreneurs have to act like they do know what's going to happen. They have to plan for the future even though they don't know it. And entrepreneurs have taken on the responsibility for their business. If you work for another company and the business fails, you can just leave. You haven't really lost any money. If you're an entrepreneur, though, and your business fails, you lose money because of everything that you've put into it. So these entrepreneurs will lose money if they don't successfully predict the future. Now think about how hard that would be to do, and yet thousands of people do it every day. Today's smash hit could be tomorrow's flop. They have no security because today they might be doing well, but tomorrow they might fail, and yet they have to keep on and keep on at it. Entrepreneurs can't really communicate with their boss like others can. Entrepreneurs, their boss is basically the consumers. How are you going to communicate with the consumers? Well, it's hard to communicate with thousands of people who are your customers. You have no idea what they want, and yet you have to try to provide that. And I'd like to point out here that entrepreneurs aren't only famous people like Bill Gates. There are thousands of individuals who engage in this action every day. They're the people we know. You might even be an entrepreneur yourself. They're the people we work around, all the small businesses that we see in our communities. These are entrepreneurs who have taken on, they've seen a need and they're trying to fill it. On the other hand, entrepreneurs aren't really selfless benefactors to society. They're not out there to benefit society at their own cost. Entrepreneurs are out there to make money, and this is the beauty of the free market and why socialism will fail, because while the entrepreneur can make money, he's benefiting society. He's not a thief taking money from someone else. He's benefiting everyone else and yet making money himself. Socialism depends on a faulty view of humans. They don't take into account that we're selfish people. The free market does, and it allows for that and accounts for it. So that's how the free market is able to operate.